Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from samgerrans.com. Today is Wednesday 23rd, 2023, and today the subject is US sanctions of China over forced assimilation of children. Well, that's the ostensible title, subject. What the actual subject is propaganda. I haven't read this article. It's all propaganda. You are the target. Your mind isn't your own. I'm just demonstrating how and why that works. It might sound sort of conspiratorial, but really it isn't. It's all I'm doing in this portion of my project is explaining how a water faucet works. It's no more complicated than that. If you really want to know how it works, just read a couple of books. You don't need much. I would start with Jacques Ellul's book, Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes. And if you get that one, I'd read his book, The Technological Society. There are a few other books, but you just read a couple and understand them. You'll get it. Like a combustion engine, there will be some sort of different implementations of the same general thing, but this is how it works. And people don't like to face the fact that their minds aren't their own because, it's kind of insulting in a way, isn't it? We tend to feel that we make up our own minds, etc. A few people do, but most people don't. And if you want a ratio, if you want to kind of like a rule of thumb about how independent-minded somebody is, then what you want to do is basically find out how many times a day they look at their telephone. Okay, the greater the amount of times they look at their telephone, especially social media, the less control of their mind they've got. Now, there are probably some other ways of doing it as well, but that's a fairly standard one. All right, what we're going to do is look at this article. I haven't read it, as I famously say every time. I don't need to. I already know what it is. It's like, you go into a restaurant, you don't need to know what's there. You know it's food and you know it's going to consist of certain types of ingredients. Before I get into it, a little bit of housekeeping. Starting next week, I will be making 2 videos a week. I'm going to move my long form piece from Monday to Tuesday, and then I'll be doing another piece a bit like this on a Thursday, probably something like that. I need the time for other things. Anyway, so that's it. Let's just jump into it and see how we go. So here we are. The Guardian, yes. China officials hit by US sanctions over forced assimilation of children in Tibet. Antony Blinken criticizes China's state boarding schools that, quote, seek to eliminate Tibet's distinct linguistic, cultural and religious traditions. Now, the reason why I picked up on this is because I knew that this is going to be a rank example of, or an example of rank hypocrisy. I grew up in the United Kingdom of the 1970s. Perhaps it wasn't so obvious then, but certainly moving into the time of our good friend, that poor little pusillanimous prostitute, Tony Blair, was that this is precisely what we experienced in England. What's the word they used? Eliminating Tibet's distinct linguistic, cultural and religious traditions. And we had this in the UK, and we still have it. We're being essentially eradicated, people who created these countries. In all of the Western countries, apart, I think, to some extent, Hungary. And so all I'm saying is that it's absolutely fine to eradicate people's linguistic, cultural and religious traditions when it suits them. You see, this is the point that I'm going to make. I'm not going to argue against what's going on, against so-called globalism or any of this stuff, against propaganda even. If you understand the time that you're living in, all of these sorts of arguments become essentially redundant, especially if you take the time to read Ellul's book on technique. You'll see why. And if you want to kind of bolster that up with something else, I would really recommend reading René Guénon's book, The Reign of Quantity and Signs of the Times. And you'll really get it. We're living through the involution of the caste system, the collapse of what the Hindus call the Yuga, the Kali Yuga. This is the last. We're collapsing. We're told that we're in progress, but actually we're collapsing. We're almost in free fall. And it doesn't matter where you live. If you live in the democratic West, or you live in the authoritarian Russia and or China, wherever it is, you've all got the same basic religion. which is summarized very well in Technique. It's a materialistic idea that more is better, and it's predicated on the idea that standard of living is something which can be essentially measured in money and stuff, and that's a religion. And as I say almost every week, Technique, those countries which do not embrace Technique will be destroyed, must be destroyed by those which do, and those which do will be destroyed by it itself. I'm not here trying to save the world. I'm not here trying to stop any of this. I just understand the direction that this train is going in, and that's all. Okay. Anyway, what we're doing is looking at this just to show the hypocrisy. Now, I'm not surprised by hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is normal. The ability to lie, which Tony Blinken, I mean, the man can't move without lying. He can't, his lips don't move without him lying. Now, to you or me, just, normal people, we think, he's a liar. Isn't that a terrible thing? Not in his world. Of course not. That's his stock in trade. That's what he does. He would think that you are naive and somewhat retarded for thinking in these terms. You're just demonstrating your inability to comprehend real politics because you have an emotional response to somebody who's lying through his teeth. Of course he's lying through his teeth. That's what he's paid to do. It's not a moral judgment. It's, okay, let me put it to you this way. Painters and decorators paint and decorate. Correct? Correct. Okay, if you don't paint and decorate, you're not going to be a painter and decorator. You're just not going to be able to do it. Tony Blinken is a paid PR guy for a military-industrial complex of power, which is anything but what you vote for, and he's very good at his job. I mean, in terms of in the terms that he would see it in. So if you're sort of being triggered by the word lying, you don't understand the nature of the job. It would be like saying, this man cooks every time he goes to work. Well, yes, he's a chef. That's what he's supposed to do. That's how Tony Blinken would see it, see? So the United States will impose visa sanctions on Chinese officials pursuing forced assimilation of children in Tibet, where UK experts say 1 million children have been separated from their families. Well, you and experts, maybe this is true. I don't know, but you'd be unlikely to find out. Experts just pay for experts. Reminds me of the thing they said to the chap who built this Suez Canal. They said to him, well, the experts say it can't be done. What are you going to do? He said, I'm going to find myself some new experts. Experts are they're nothing. Experts, you can buy the experts you want to say anything you want. Same scientists. People still think that scientists are sort of special in some way. The only people who think scientists are special aren't scientists, I'll tell you that much. Anyway, let's get on to it. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the US would restrict visas to Chinese officials behind the policy of state boarding schools in the latest of a series of US moves on Beijing that comes despite a resumption of high-level dialogue. Quote, these coercive policies seek to eliminate Tibet's distinctive linguistic, cultural and religious traditions among younger generations of Tibetans, Blinken said in a statement. Now, I just say that, again, I don't care. I honestly don't care about any of this. We're just rearranging the decks on the Titanic as far as I'm concerned. But if you are interested, where's the consistency here? Every country America goes into, they destroy the culture, the background, the language. What was it they used? The linguistic, cultural and religious traditions of every single country that they go into. This is their modus operandi. But in this one case, because it's China, they don't like it, see? And this is the point I'm making. I'm not backing the Chinese. I'm not backing the Tibetans. I'm not backing the Americans. I'm not backing any of them. I couldn't care less about any of it. I mean, I care on a personal level, but geopolitically, I don't care. It's inevitable that a society, a world society, a global society in the state of moral, religious, cultural implosion and freefall, which we are in, is going to look like this. To me, you see, You may disagree, and you're welcome to it. Happy you. We urge PRC, People's Republic of China, authorities to end the coercion of Tibetan children into government-run boarding schools and to cease repressive assimilation policies both in Tibet and throughout other parts of the PRC, he said, referring to the People's Republic of China. Now, I'm not a huge expert on the People's Republic of China, and I'm not here, as I say, sort of protecting it or defending it, but I'm pretty sure that they're not mutilating the genitals of the children in their schools and convincing 4-year-old boys that they're girls and 4-year-old girls that they're boys, and all the rest of that which your children are being subjected to in the West. This is not an either or. It doesn't mean just, the enemy of your enemy may also be your enemy. I'm not here making some sort of claims here. I'm just saying that look at yourselves. Look at what Tony Blinken and the government he represents, that he lies for, that he shills for, is promoting across the world. An agenda of sodomy and delusion and a sort of almost a kind of relativism, where if you feel that you're a 36-year-old man when you're actually a 28-year-old woman or something, then that's not to allow you to, be your fuller, fluffier self is some form of oppression. But in this case, it's all evil, you see. I'll give you another example of it. I've grown up with this anti-German propaganda all of my life, how evil the Germans were. Perhaps they were evil, I don't know. But how could you know? Because all I've ever heard all of my life about Germans, I'm talking about, pre-1945 Germans, because the Germans since then, frankly, are a complete shower, in my opinion. They've just allowed themselves to be, stripped of any dignity, as have pretty much all the peoples of Europe, because I think whilst they were, decided to so-called denazify Germany, i.e. to inculcate Germans into some sense of guilt about how evil they were, they did it to all of the whites of Europe. I was subject to this as growing up, this propaganda. I knew it was nonsense then. I know it's nonsense now. But my point is that whilst they vilify Germans, all Germans, not just some Germans, but all Germans, prior to 1945, and by extension, all Germans since 1945, and all other Europeans as well, the American government is spending, or is said to have spent up to already $500 billion supporting a Nazi regime in Ukraine. And it is a Nazi regime. Now you may say, "Oh, Sam, you're saying some, outrageous things." You've heard of Google, right? Have a little look. Have a little, look about, and put in Ukraine Nazis. Go to the images. You'll see it. It's all there. It is real. Okay. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just telling you that this is how it is. Anyway, let's get on with this. A State Department spokesman said the new restrictions would apply to current and former officials involved in education policy in Tibet, but did not give further details, citing US confidentiality laws on visa records. Yeah, well, of course, the US is so moral, and as we've seen, my point is that the US administration will say anything. It has no morals, has none whatsoever. There is no contract that it will sign that it won't renege on. There's nothing. And I'm not arguing against this. I'm just pointing this out. When people like Blinken make these sort of comments, he knows that you haven't got the memory of a goldfish. All right? He knows that you aren't able to join together any sorts of dots. And he knows that you are under the influence of a propaganda machine so vast that you don't even notice it. Because every Hollywood film you watch kind of compounds this idea of this moral, amazing America. And maybe America was moral and amazing at some point. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm not saying there aren't good things about it now. But the idea of the sort of the city on the hill, that idea, has died a long time ago. As somebody who lives in Russia, and I have travelled across the United States, although it was about 4 or 5 years ago, when America was much better than it is now, I have to say that Russia, most parts of it are cheaper, safer, and better educated than pretty much everything that I saw in America. There were enclaves of intelligence. Washington, when I got out of the station at Washington DC, I was like, whoa, you could kind of feel it in actual intelligence. Some in New York, different kind though, more like a different sort. But in Washington, yeah, definitely. But from what I saw, and I did travel coast to coast and not in a straight line, pretty much the place is a desert in that sense. Russia is a big country, and it's very uneven, but there are multiple centers. Moscow, of course, primarily, but there are maybe another 10 or 15 cities where you're going to find really smart people there as well. Maybe they exist still in America, I don't know, but my sense of it is that there are much more broader educated people here. I'm not saying everyone here is a genius, they're not. And a lot of these same tendencies that you get in the West, you get here, you do. But there is more of a kind of like an emphasis on education here than there seems to be in America. To continue, the US separately imposed sanctions in December on 2 top-ranking Chinese officials with unpronounceable names over what Washington said were widespread human rights violations in Tibet. Blinken, in his statement, cited a figure given in February by 3 UN experts. You remember, just if you learn nothing else, remember nothing else from this talk, just be very wary when you hear the word experts. You see, the word expert doesn't really mean anything. It's the equivalent in an essay of saying some people think. Would you get away with that? I mean, I don't know what the education system's like now, but when I was at university, if you said some people think in an essay, you'd have been taken to task for it. You can't say some people think, It's experts think. Well, who's an expert? One person's expert is another man's propagandist, is another man's idiot. It's some people think, here's something I want. It's a bit like if you come across anybody and they're award-winning. Watch out for award-winning. Award-winning, and it doesn't say, if you've won the Pulitzer Prize, fine, you say so. Although I'd argue that even that and more particularly the Nobel Prize aren't worth what they were once. But even so, award-winning or widely respected or blah blah blah. It's a meaningless puff phrase, is what it is, which preys on the unaware and the sort of uncautious to kind of pump themselves up with froth. Blah de blah. Where were we? Blinken, in his statement, cited a figure given by 3 UN experts who are not cited, who said that around 1 million Tibetan children have been forcibly removed into boarding schools. The program appeared aimed at unwillingly integrating Tibetans into Chinese-majority Han culture, with compulsory education in Mandarin and no instruction culturally relevant to the Buddhist-majority Himalayan region, the specialist rapporteurs said. So you've got a French word, it must be good. You could spin this completely differently. I'll just have a go off the top of my head, okay? China's spending lots of money to help integrate Tibetans who otherwise would be excluded from the culture by educating them into the dominant language and culture of the society in which they live in order to help them get ahead in the society. You see, it's all froth. You can spin it this way, you can spin it that way, but you're too dumb. According to the people who do this, they bank on you being too stupid, and I mean, let's face it, they're not often wrong, to think that perhaps these same facts could be argued with completely different emphasis. And if you have noticed that nobody here, their experts are anonymous. There's no reference here, nothing you can check. Okay, it's about creating an impression. That's all it's about. I'm not saying the facts are wrong. How would I know? I can't verify any of them. Anyway, let's get on to the rest of it. A separate report this year from UN experts, there they are, said that hundreds of thousands of Tibetans have also been forced out of traditional rural life into low-skill, quote, vocational training as a pretext to undermine their identity. Now, this is very loaded. Again, if you just think back to how I reinterpreted the same facts just a minute ago, you could do exactly the same here. who knows what people's intentions are. What you will find, especially in cheap Western propaganda, I mean, they have better propaganda, but in cheap Western propaganda, they're always identifying somebody's motivations and then impugning them for not being as virtuous as yours would be. And this is particularly effective on what I call libtards, who are really the inheritors of the Protestant religion, except that they didn't believe in it very deeply when they did believe it, and now they've been told not to believe in God, and so they obediently don't believe in God anymore. But they still want to virtue signal. They need to feel morally superior. It's a form of actually racism, but they wouldn't understand that. But that is what it is. Anyway, let's wrap this up because it's too dull. It's blah, blah, blah. The Chinese Foreign Ministry called the report, quote, completely unfounded, and said the Tibet region, quote, enjoys social stability, economic development, ethnic unity, religious harmony, and people live and work in peace. Now, this is a tip of the hat in the direction of presenting both sides. But we know those evil Chinese, they lie all the time. And also, we've got the United Nations experts on our side. If the evil Chinese were telling the truth, they would be able to cite anonymous UN sources too. I'm not saying I don't know. In fact, I don't even care what of this is true, if anything. I'm just trying to demonstrate to you how it's, if the writer is intelligent, probably not that intelligent, but the editor will be. The person who had the last glance at this before it went live, he or she will understand this. All right. It's better if the journalists don't understand it. Most of them are idiots. The International Campaign for Tibet, a pressure group close to the region's spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. I'll just say it's about the Dalai Lama. I don't buy into the Dalai Lama. I never have. This kind of, Yoda-like endless spiritual man that he's been rammed down our throats, for about all of my life. I've never met him, but I have to tell you, I just never bought in. I never bought into Gandhi either, or Nelson Mandela. Any of these modern day saints, if the whole of the media machine is pushing them, I have to say that. I could be wrong. Mother Teresa as well. Never bought into her either. I'm suspicious. Just maybe I err on the side of over caution sometimes, but I would say be careful. If the media is really behind somebody, you can be fairly sure that they're being used for something. Applauded Blinken's action against the, quote, unconscionable separation of children. Oh, that's interesting. So the Dalai Lama applauds exactly what it is that the status quo wants to happen. He's kind of like spiritual confirmation of whatever it is that the military-industrial complex wants to do. As the Dalai Lama often says, Tibetan culture based on peace and compassion has value to offer the entire world, said the group's president. I'm not even going to attempt it. Sounds a bit like, sounds a bit like Zelensky, doesn't it? It's like a Zelensky statement. I wonder if they've got the same script writers. This boarding school program targets the most vulnerable and impressionable minds and is aimed at converting Tibetans into Chinese, cementing the government's control over Tibet and annihilating the Tibetan culture and way of life, she said. Now, every word of that may be true. I have no way of knowing. I don't think you probably do either. However, it is interesting that the Dalai Lama is consistently on the side of big government and the military-industrial complex and, building up for a new war. Tibet has alternated over the centuries between independence and control by China. Beijing claims it, quote, peacefully liberated, end quote, the region in 1951 and brought infrastructure and education to the previously undeveloped region. But as I say, the Chinese, little slanty-eyed people, they all lie all the time. And if they didn't lie all the time, they would have a UN expert, or anonymous one at least, on hand to back up their version of events. I've no idea, and nor do you probably, on the actual historical veracity of this. And frankly, for our purposes, I'm not interested in it. I'm just showing you that news isn't news. It's just an occasion to form an impression And that's all it is. That's all it is. Finishing up now. The Dalai Lama, who fled into exile in India in 1959, has won a global following through his spiritual teachings while raising awareness about Tibet. Yeah, I would say he's been soft-pedaled by the media machine since the 1950s, and presented as a sort of generally but non-specifically qualified guru on every subject. But why? What is this thing that he knows? What is it specifically? Well, yeah, he's old. Okay, he looks like he might be wise. Sure. He wears a kind of a robe. Okay, fine. And he's called the Dalai Lama, not just, Fred Bloggs or the Tibetan equivalent thereof, but he's got a title. Maybe it's all true. I don't know. But I can't catch, I can't catch this feeling of euphoria we're all supposed to have about him. It's a bit like he's the kind of spiritual Volodymyr Zelensky. It's one of these rock stars that are just pre-made, like Einstein. I take as I find. I'm not just going to be sort of railroaded into sort of kowtowing down to some figure. I mean, let's see what you do, because if you want my take on it, actual greatness is the ability to stand true to something in the face of great odds. That's actual greatness, and I can think of actually great men who are alive today, but none of them are very popular in the mainstream media. Okay. At 88, the monk has now slowed his travels and said he may break Buddhist tradition and pick his own reincarnation, or declare the institution over, fearing officially atheist Beijing will identify and groom a pliant successor, i.e. somebody that the West doesn't control. Anyway, there you are. You may disagree with everything that I've said in terms of, my interpretation, and that's absolutely fine. But if I've helped you in any way to engage with media, and when I say media, I mean education, television, music, the whole thing, in a more critical way, then that's great. Details of where I upload to, how you can join my Substack and Telegram channel, support my work, and download my books free are in the description. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.